The main house is for the living. You take the basement, or you take the street. My father said those words to me while the dirt was still fresh on my mother's grave. He didn't even look me in the eye. He just handed the keys to his mistress, Brenda, who was already wearing my mother's diamond earrings. Then he leaned in close. Your mother isn't here to protect you anymore. Before I tell you how he ended up in handcuffs in that exact same driveway 30 days later, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see how far this story travels. The basement smelled of wet earth and forgotten things. It was a space designed for storage, not human habitation, with concrete walls that sweated when it rained, and a single high window that let in a sliver of gray light. Upstairs, I could hear them. The thud of heavy boots, the scrape of furniture being dragged across hardwood, and the high, sharp sound of Brenda's laughter. They were erasing my mother. I could hear it happening, room by room. The crash of glass into a dumpster outside meant her perfume collection was gone. The rhythmic thumping of heavy bags meant her clothes were heading for the trash. I sat on a cot in the corner, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled like the hospital. My name is Sophia, and I am 29 years old. Just 6 months ago, I was managing a logistics team for a shipping conglomerate. Then the sickness hit an aggressive autoimmune flare that nearly shut down my kidneys and left me weighing 90 pounds. I had moved back home so my mother could help me recover. She had nursed me back from the brink of death while fighting her own battle. Now, she was gone, and I was the ghost haunting the foundations of her house. My father, Edward, didn't see a daughter when he looked at me. He saw a liability, a sick, pale, trembling thing that cost money to feed and offered no return on investment. He assumed I was broken. He assumed that because I was physically weak, my mind was soft too. That was his first mistake. When he came down the stairs that first night to tell me my duties, cooking dinner, washing Brenda's car, keeping out of sight when guests came over, I didn't scream. I didn't cry or beg for mercy. I just nodded. I looked at the floor and said, "Okay, Dad. I learned a long time ago that you cannot win a war against a narcissist by fighting. Fighting feeds them. Your anger is their fuel. Your tears are their trophy. If you scream, they paint you as crazy. If you debate, they gaslight you until you question your own name." So, I initiated what psychologists call the gray rock strategy. I became as uninteresting and unresponsive as a rock. I offered no emotional reaction. I gave short, boring answers. I made myself invisible. I needed him to think I was defeated. I needed him to look at me and see a piece of furniture, something useful but ultimately negligible. Because if he thought I was broken, he wouldn't look closely at what I was doing when he wasn't watching. He wouldn't notice that while I was dusting his office, I was memorizing where he kept the key to the filing cabinet. He wouldn't notice that while I was serving them roast chicken like a maid, I was listening to every word of their hushed conversations about offshore accounts and tax loopholes. I spent my days in the shadows, moving quietly through the house my mother built. I washed the dishes, while Brenda complained that the water pressure wasn't high enough. I ironed my father's shirts while he complained that I moved too slowly. I absorbed every insult, every dismissive wave of the hand, and I stored it away. They thought my silence was submission. They didn't understand that silence is the only place where you can hear the tumblers of a lock clicking into place. I wasn't submitting. I was gathering ammunition. A week later, I woke up to the smell of smoke. It wasn't the comforting scent of a fireplace in winter. It was acrid, thick with the smell of burning paper and melting plastic. I ran up the basement stairs and out the back door. There, in the center of the manicured lawn my mother had tended for 30 years, was a bonfire. Edward stood by the flames, a poker in his hand. Next to him was a stack of boxes I recognized instantly. They were my mother's architectural archives, her sketches, her blueprints, the leather-bound journals where she had drafted the designs for half the skyline of this city. He tossed a roll of vellum onto the fire. It caught instantly, curling into black ash. "Stop!" The scream tore out of my throat before I could catch it. I lunged forward, but Brenda stepped in my path, holding a glass of Chardonnay, smiling like she was watching a fireworks display. "It's just clutter, honey," she drawled. "We're making space for the hot tub." Edward didn't even look at me. He just threw another journal into the flames. I watched the leather cover blister and pop. That book contained the original concepts for the library downtown. It was history. It was her soul. And he was burning it like garbage. "You have a choice, Sophia," he said, watching the sparks fly up into the night sky. "You can keep living like a rat in my basement while I burn through every trace of her, or you can be smart." He turned to face me, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows across his face. He pulled a document from his jacket pocket. "This is a quitclaim deed. You sign over your rights to the estate completely, irrevocably, and I will cut you a check for $50,000. You can take your little bags and go start over in some cheap apartment where I never have to see your face again. And if I don't, I asked, my voice trembling. Then I evict you, he said. It will take months. And every single day, I will make your life a living hell. I will burn everything she ever touched. I will bring women here who will make Brenda look like a saint. By the time the sheriff throws you out, you will have nothing but the clothes on your back. I looked at the fire. I watched the edges of a sketch turn orange and disappear. In that moment, I wanted to claw his eyes out. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered. But then, I remembered the binder hidden under my mattress in the basement. I remembered the forensic audit my mother had compiled. He thought he was burning my past. He didn't realize he was actually lighting the fuse for his own funeral. I forced tears into my eyes. I let my shoulders slump, making myself look small and defeated. 50,000? I whimpered. That's not enough. Mom left millions. Mom left me millions, he corrected with a sneer. You get 50 grand or you get nothing. I took a shaky breath, wiping my eyes. Okay, I whispered. I'll sign. But I want the check today. I want to leave. Smart girl. He laughed, reaching for a pen. No, I said, pulling back slightly. Not here. I want to do it properly. At the lawyer's office. I want Mr. Vance to notarize it so you can't cancel the check the moment I walk out the door. Edward looked at Brenda and laughed. A cruel, barking sound. She thinks I'm going to stiff her on 50 grand. Look at her, greedy to the end. He turned back to me, his grin predatory. Fine. Tomorrow at 2. Vance's office. You sign the deed, you get your scraps, and you get out. He threw the last box onto the fire. I didn't flinch this time. I just watched it burn, knowing that tomorrow, he would be the one walking into the flames. The waiting room at Vance & Associates was aggressively sterile. The walls were glass, the carpet was a muted gray that swallowed sound, and the air conditioning was set to a temperature designed to keep people alert and uncomfortable. I sat in a leather chair, my hands folded in my lap, watching the second hand on the clock tick. Edward paced. He checked his watch, straightened his tie, and shot impatient glares at the receptionist. He was vibrating with energy, the frantic, greedy energy of a man who can smell money but can't quite touch it yet. At exactly 2 o'clock, the heavy oak doors opened, and Mr. Vance beckoned us in. The conference room was vast, dominated by a long mahogany table that gleamed under the recessed lighting. In the corner, a small black dome camera blinked silently, a standard security feature in high-end law firms, one that most people ignored. Mr. Henderson, Miss Henderson, Vance said, gesturing to the chairs. He was a man made of sharp angles and expensive tailoring, his face a mask of professional detachment. Please, sit. We sat. Edward took the head of the table, naturally. I took the chair opposite him, making myself look small, hunched, defeated. Before we begin, Vance said, tapping a tablet on the table, I must inform you that per firm policy regarding disputed estates, this meeting is being video-proctored for liability purposes. Do you consent to being recorded? Edward waved a hand dismissively, barely looking up from the documents spread out before him. Record whatever you want. Just get the girl to sign so we can get this over with. Vance looked at me. Miss Henderson? I consent, I whispered, keeping my eyes on the table. Excellent. Vance opened a folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. This is the quitclaim deed. By signing this, you relinquish all current and future claims to the estate of Eleanor Henderson, including the primary residence, investment accounts, and any personal property therein. In exchange, you will receive a one-time payment of $50,000. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, not an act this time. The enormity of what I was doing, the risk I was taking, suddenly crashed over me. If this went wrong, if he read the fine print, if he walked out, sign it, Sophia. Edward snapped. Don't drag this out. I signed. The scratch of the pen on paper sounded deafening in the quiet room. I pushed the document back to Vance. Edward grinned, a predatory baring of teeth. There. Done. Now, where's the wire transfer for the main estate? 1 moment, Vance said, his voice cool. He checked his watch theatrically. Edward, the federal wire cutoff for the $33 million transfer is 4 o'clock. We have exactly 10 minutes. If we miss this window, the assets go back into probate freeze for another 90 days for auditing. Panic flared in Edward's eyes. I knew why. He had debts. He had promised Brenda a lifestyle he couldn't afford without that money. A 3-month delay would be catastrophic. Well, hurry up then, Edward barked. What's the holdup? Just one final formality, Vance said, sliding a second document across the table. It was dense with text, topped with a bold header. This is the fiduciary asset disclosure. It's standard for the estate tax exemption. You just need to swear that you haven't transferred any marital assets to third parties in the last 3 years. It confirms the estate value hasn't been diluted. Edward snatched the pen. He didn't read a single word. He didn't look at the clauses about perjury or federal fraud. He just saw the clock ticking down and the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. "Give me the damn pen," he snarled. He signed his name with a flourish, pressing so hard the tip nearly tore the paper. "There. Happy? Now transfer the money." Vance took the document. He pulled out his notary stamp. He pressed it down next to Edward's signature. Thud. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Vance said, his voice changing. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. "The ink is dry." That was the signal. I stopped trembling. I sat up straight, rolling my shoulders back. I looked Edward directly in the eye. And for the first time in 6 months, I let him see me. I let him see the rage, the intelligence, the absolute lack of fear. "You really should have read that, Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear. Edward frowned, confusion clouding his arrogance. "What?" I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the heavy black binder I'd retrieved from under my mattress. I dropped it onto the table with a heavy slap. "You just committed felony perjury and tax fraud," I said. "And you did it on camera." Edward stared at the binder, as if it were a bomb. For a moment, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Then, he laughed a nervous, dismissive sound. "Perjury?" he scoffed. "Don't be dramatic, Sophia. I haven't done anything illegal. I just signed a piece of paper." "You signed a federal disclosure," Mr. Vance corrected, his voice devoid of warmth. "You swore, under penalty of law, that the marital estate was intact." I reached over and flipped the binder open to the first tab. It wasn't just a collection of papers. It was an autopsy of his greed. My mother hadn't spent her final months just dying. She had spent them tracking every single dollar he tried to hide. "Page 1, I said, pointing to a highlighted row. "March 12th, $50,000 wired to a shell company, listed as B Design Solutions." "Page 3, June 4th, $120,000 for consulting fees." "Page 10, September 1st, a down payment on a condo in Miami." Edward's face went pale. He recognized the dates. He recognized the amounts. "I pulled the incorporation papers for B Design Solutions," I continued, turning the page. "The registered agent is Brenda Miller. You didn't just cheat on Mom, Dad. You siphoned nearly $2 million of marital assets into your mistress's bank account over 3 years. And you never paid gift tax on any of it." "It was my money," Edward shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I earned it. I can spend it however I want. Not without your wife's consent in a community property state," Vance interjected smoothly. "And certainly not without declaring it to the IRS." I watched him unravel. It wasn't the explosive anger I was used to. It was the terrified realization of a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room, only to find out he was the mark. "You just signed a document stating those transfers never happened," I said, my voice cold. "That is perjury. That is fraud. And because you used wire transfers to move the money across state lines, it's also federal wire fraud." Edward looked at Vance, desperate for an ally. "James, fix this. It's just a misunderstanding. We can tear up the paper. I'll sign a new one." Vance didn't move. He didn't blink. He looked at Edward with the professional disdain of a man who follows the law looking at a man who thinks he is above it. "I can't do that, Edward," Vance said. "The document is notarized. It's already been scanned into our secure server. It's a legal record now, and as an officer of the court, I am legally obligated to report this discrepancy." Vance reached for the phone on the console. "I am freezing all assets of the Henderson estate immediately pending a federal fraud investigation. The $33 million is locked. The house deed is locked. You can't touch a cent." Edward stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You can't do this. I have obligations. Brenda is waiting for—" "Ah, yes. Miss Miller," Vance interrupted. He looked down at his notes. "That brings us to the final point. Since Miss Miller received stolen marital funds through a fraudulent shell company, she is not merely a bystander. She is a co-conspirator in a federal embezzlement case." Edward froze. "I forwarded this audit to the district attorney 20 minutes before this meeting began," Vance said, checking his watch. "The warrant was issued immediately. The police aren't just coming for your assets, Edward. They picked up Miss Brenda at the mansion 10 minutes ago." The color drained from Edward's face so completely he looked like a corpse. He slumped back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The money was gone. The house was gone. The woman he had burned my mother's legacy for was in the back of a squad car. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. You set me up. I didn't set you up, I said, closing the binder. I just handed you the pen. You're the one who signed. The silence in the room shattered. Edward lunged across the table, his hands clawing for the binder, for me, for anything he could destroy. You ungrateful little witch, he screamed, his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. Vance didn't flinch. He simply pressed a red button on the underside of the table. A silent alarm. Edward stopped short, breathing heavily, his eyes darting around the room. He realized he couldn't reach me. He realized the money was gone. But then, I saw the shift. I saw the moment his brain switched from greed to survival, from predator to cornered animal. Psychologists call it an extinction burst. The moment a narcissist realizes control is slipping and escalates to extreme measures. Edward was not going to lose quietly. He intended to destroy me with him. His hands shook as he dialed 3 digits, though his voice stayed eerily calm. 911. My daughter is having a psychotic episode, he said. She has a knife. She's threatening to hurt me. And herself. Then he ended the call, met my stare, and smashed his own face into the table. Blood spilled across the documents. When the police arrive, he snarled, they'll see a terrified father and a violent daughter. A psychiatric hold wipes out your credibility. I'll take control of your finances and disappear with your mother's money. He slid a letter opener toward me. Pick it up. Sirens wailed. Moments later, officers burst in. Edward collapsed against the cabinet, pointing at me. She tried to stab me. I was slammed onto the table and cuffed. Assault with a deadly weapon. An officer barked. Edward watched with smug triumph until I spoke. Look at the ceiling. In the corner blinked a small black dome. A security camera. Mr. Vance stood calmly. These proceedings were recorded with audio and video, streaming off-site. Edward went gray. We have footage of Mr. Henderson staging this entire scene, Vance said and pressed play. The screen showed Edward calling police, then striking himself. Uncuff her, the lead officer ordered. My cuffs fell away. Edward stammered as officers turned on him. Hands behind your back. He was arrested instead. I'm your father, he whispered. I know, I replied. That's why I recorded everything. Outside, he saw Brenda already in custody. The truth finally landed. He had lost everything. Prosecutors charged him with fraud, perjury, filing a false report, and attempted entrapment. He now awaits trial without bail. 2 days later, the estate felt empty of fear for the first time in decades. I placed my mother's photo on the mantel. New locks replaced the old ones. My father mistook silence for weakness. He forgot that silence is where traps are built. If you have ever used the gray rock method to survive a toxic family member, share a stone in the comments.